Okay, so we now have Sarah and plan change program update.
Something the next stage of the argument. It's the changes to other things. It's really the one thing. So it's not that should be clean. That's just this is straight out. Thanks. Oh, yeah, you got it. You're okay.
Okay.
Kia ora, thanks for having us today. It's good to see you all. So we're here to speak about plan change programs. Mark spoke to you all on the 4th of June about the unit update. We're digging into the plan change program to do with city planning today. So a brief recap of what the team has responsibility for: spatial planning, greenfield planning, which is given effect to by the district plans, and specifically in the district plan, we give effect. We prepare and maintain the district plan monitor, manage, and as part of that process, that involves plan change. One of the other things that Sarah will be speaking to you a bit later on is how the changes to the RM system affect our plan change. So I guess what I'd like to say before we get into the detail of each plan change specifically, there is a lot of information that we've included on the slides. We'll be touching over the highlights of that, but we put that information there for you all to see. And if you have any questions, then please do ask them. Jumping in on this slide, this is to emphasise the plan change process. And as Councillor Moore alluded to just a few moments ago, it is a complex process. It does take time. So just getting to that point of notifying the plan change, the fourth element on the slide there, from there to making decisions, that can take up to 2 years. But the period ahead of getting to notification, that can take a year, 2 years, depending on the complexity of the subject that we're traversing at the time. And then on the other side of the plan change, after you've made the decision, there's a 30-day period from notification for appeals to be lodged. And then any appeal could take X amount of time, again, depending on the complexity of the issue. But the point being, I guess, in simple terms, plan changes do take time, and we do recognise them. That's just a quick one there, just saying what we've done so far, sort of through it. Now, focus programs to date, you can see this is the focus of what's happened each year with our plan changes. And you'll see as we skip through to the next slide, since 2020, going up until last year, the primary focus has been PC14, has taken a lot of our resource. And as a result, we haven't been able to progress a lot of plan changes that we'd like to in the meantime. However, moving on to 2025 this year, you can see that has started to change, and we've started to implement, or should I say, develop a broader range of topics. Now, as you can see from the current plan change programme, it's busy. There's a lot going on. We have 3 plan changes that are currently in the statutory process, i.e. we've already notified them, but we have 6 that are in preparation. We'll go through these in detail in a minute. 4 private plan changes, which Sarah will touch on in a moment, and as well as the fast track applications.
I'm just sort of showing you here where lodged private plan changes, we can show where those locations are. We'll note though that there's a lot of interest for further private plan changes for other greenfield areas. So we can't show those yet, but when they are, we can add them to the map for you. They're at various stages, all quite at early stages at the moment, most of them through their request for further information so that we can understand the impacts of the private plan changes. And as I said, there's been quite a bit of other interest in other land areas, and we work with the asset network teams. That's one of the primary first steps when they're asking whether our Free Waters has capacity to cope with. So that's quite a significant part of our worker program at the moment. Just indicating there as well, where it's a mix of business, mainly industrial proposals, and residential.
There's no legend on it. I don't know what the different colours mean.
The yellow is residential areas, purple is industrial business areas, and the green is some open space areas. The sort of light tanny colour is the currently rural zoned land, and the two shades there, I'm just sort of indicating those are the updated modelled airport noise contours. So it's just sort of showing the fact that where the interest is largely occurring is pretty much on the western side of the city, where our main rural urban fringe areas are. Okay, so just sort of noting here the fact that we have 12 staff and the two of us in our team. We do have some vacancies and some more capacity coming on stream. So we're at the process now of advertising, and we have a consultant budget that helps us deliver across our plan changes. Private plan changes, they're all chargeable, but our council plan changes, lead plan changes are paid through rates. So most of our consultancy costs come through in technical work, but also for commissioners when they make decisions on plan changes, recommendations.
Okay, PC7, which is managing significant indigenous vegetation, just the key aspects that I'd like to just highlight for you. We do have an extension on the time that decisions are required by, and that's to the 30th of April next year. I guess what we've been doing since the plan change was notified is waiting and seeing the publication of the MPS on Indigenous biodiversity and then the update to that MPS. So we've had to wait a couple of times just to make sure that our plan change is developed in line with that. So we're currently going back through that at the moment, reviewing it. And one of the key tasks that the MPS sets for us is engaging in partnership with Sangha Venua and specified Maori landowners to develop rules, which when you think in terms of the concept of rangatiratanga, is quite a sensitive process that we need to take the right steps throughout the process, and that's currently what we're doing in PC7.
Just an update on Plan Change 12, coastal hazards. We're seeking to implement the New Zealand Coastal Policy Statement. That's where we need to demonstrate that we can avoid increasing risk to people and property, but it's also providing for enablement under the New Zealand Coastal Policy Statement subject to conditions, so mitigation can be provided for. Our focus, we need to assess across the four wellbeings. Environmental, we know where our hazardous areas are. There's been a lot of hazard risk management, risk profiling of our land in terms of coastal hazards. Where we have been concentrating our work in is these other areas, the economic, social and cultural effects from implementing provisions. So that's new regulation. One of the key tests which we need to ensure that we've assessed well is that is regarding economic growth, so that if we're seeking to reduce economic growth, that we have evaluated that appropriately through any new regulation we're proposing, and that includes employment. So if we're seeking to reduce development rights, that we've assessed that. And also one of the other tests is acting when we've got uncertainty in terms of longer term impacts. We have undertaken a baseline report into socioeconomic effects. So this has identified that there's possible social and economic wellbeing effects of any new regulation. So that's removing pre-existing development rights. Over the next 6 months, we want to test that with those most impacted. And how we propose to do this is through an integrated impact assessment. So this will include workshops, focus groups, and it's iterative and transparent. So in the outcome of that, we're hoping to the fact with those most impacted, they'll have a shared understanding of what the options are and a meaningful input into that Section 32 evaluation. We don't want this to just be a tick boxing exercise. So we're putting a lot of our resource and effort into making sure that we undertake that impact assessment. So some of those criteria will be much more in the socioeconomic criteria that we'll be testing the options against. The other major piece of work that we've commissioned, so this is with Jacobs Consultancy and our council staff, particularly our infrastructure networked staff. So what we're asking through this work is what the long-term functionality of core infrastructure that's central to supporting both existing and new land use activities. So we know that infrastructure over the next 100 years will be more vulnerable due to coastal inundation. So what we're asking is, what does that mean though? It's vulnerable. Does that mean that it's going to be less tenable? Is its function going to be compromised such that it can't support not just existing activities, but new activities that the district plan currently provides for in these areas? So we'll be testing that vulnerability and tenability under different sea level rise scenarios. Asking the question, if infrastructure fails, how is that going to impact land use? And will the functionality and tenability change depending on the location? So there may be the high risk areas, but is that functionality of that infrastructure different when you're looking at the medium risk areas? If a pump station fails, how much of an area that's going to impact, and should we can that justify reducing development rights in a particular area? So that's one of the missing or the gaps in the information that we have, or the technical evidence to date. The other, we're assessing a new option, potentially a risk, spatial and trigger-based option. So it recognises that when we have a high degree of confidence that the hazards will occur and the effects will be of high consequence, it's identifying hazard-sensitive activities that may be justified to be limited in high-risk areas. We're looking at whether we can design policies and rules that are based on risk thresholds, so medium-high, but also triggers. So the option of potentially enabling some existing development rights to continue until such time as permanent sea and or groundwater inundation, or if that infrastructure fails. So that's how we are thinking of using that infrastructure assessment to use infrastructure as a trigger that land use may need to cease or be relocated. So it's an option that's more around flexibility and responsiveness to allow for that uncertainty. We may consider using precincts. So this might define particular areas where, so not just the hazard management layers which we traditionally use, but looking at precincts to say, to treat different areas in a different, or manage them in a different manner according to the risk and the impacts. So that recognises that they may vary across a wider area, and it's going to be largely dependent on the outputs of that infrastructure assessment. What we're also identifying is hazard-sensitive activities. So is it appropriate to let these types of activities, preschools, medical centres, halls, and to allow them to locate in this area so that they continue to serve the community for a period of time? What mitigation or conditions might be possible that we consider that will reduce the risk to a reasonable level? And should we treat these types of activities differently in medium risk areas where we have less certainty in terms of the impacts compared to the higher risk areas? So those are what we're testing, and then that also, as you it can lead back to how that policy and that option for a trigger-based policy might change depending on the location. This work is going to take the rest of the year in terms of the next 6 months. So we're continuing to develop that evidence base, particularly that socioeconomic and the infrastructure. The engagement, well, we're developing the engagement plan. A lot of that is going to be around this integrated assessment approach. And then still, as we head towards, that will inform the finalisation of our draft provisions and the draft plan change, including that section 32. And that the notification will be decided by the new council in terms of timeframes.
Okay, PC 13 Heritage. You've heard from us a couple of times over the past few months. We're going to talk to you about withdrawing elements of plan change in order to make it ready for the hearing. Had the hearing on the 17th and 18th of June. We are currently preparing the council's reply to matters arising from the hearing. That's due at the end of next week, and recommendations are expected in August, with a view to council making decisions in September. Our deadline for decisions is 17th of September. Obviously, council will be breaking up for elections ahead of that, so we'll be getting to you. Hopefully, well, the intention is a week before that. So PC 17, earthworks, flood management areas and activities in the Waimakariri stop bank step backs. We came to you last year and gave you quite a detailed presentation in October on that plan change. Since then, plan change has been held in abeyance while we've been exploring one aspect to do with flood management areas. So what's been happening is the modelling, as we've been preparing the plan change, more modelling has been becoming available for flood management areas due to the different basins around the city as we've been going through that process. And each time it kind of adds more time to include that into the plan change and consider the effects of that. But in Auckland and Tauranga, there's a way that they've been doing it, which refers to kind of flood management standards rather than specifying areas on the map that then are included in the plan change. To always include the map within the district plan in the plan change requires a plan change process each time you want to update new areas that might be shown to be at risk through new modelling. This way, the intention is that the information could be updated more quickly, people could be informed quickly. What we're doing is exploring that, the idea being stitching time saves time. If we can spend time now, save time later.
We could probably just make mention here too about impervious surfaces. So that has been through Plan Change 14, one of the, I suppose, spin-off pieces of work we have been working with the engineers on testing what higher levels of impervious surface might mean for the stormwater network. That modelling has been undertaken. It is identifying some potential issues. So what we are continuing to work with the engineers is to work out what that means in practice and what are some options to manage that. So that is also, it's not listed on our plan change program, but it's certainly something that we're following up with because it has been an issue identified through Plan Change 14.
Okay, Central City Noise. Holly came to speak to you in the library at the end of May. We're currently at pre-notification engagement at the moment. So we're receiving good feedback. At the time that we prepared these slides, we'd already received around 400 responses. I'm sure that's carrying on as we talk. Over the next couple of weeks, we're having some webinars. So next Tuesday at lunchtime, there'll be a webinar. The next day in the evening, on Wednesday the 16th, there'll be a webinar. And then this week, a couple of us are going to speak to the Inner City West Neighbours Association, and we're dealing with responses that come through all the time. And then that's just obviously you've all seen this, but that's just a quick kind of snippet of what the current engagement looks like. And then moving on to the rezoning plan change. This is one of the plan changes I've been speaking to you about this before. This is one of the plan changes that has unfortunately suffered due to resource issues in the team. We've traversed those resource issues, and we're obviously bringing new resource online. But with the focus, going back to where the focus of plan change each year, now that we've kind of moved away from PC14 as being the sole focus, we're now able to refocus on things like, just wondering how many times I'm going to say the word focus, sorry, PD rezoning. So this is planned for notification, pre-notification engagement by the end of the year. That will involve all number of tidy ups, which are covered in the kind of list of where we think we might be getting, I guess, sites that need rezoning, including things that might be submitted to us as well.
Plan Change 20 is the industrial residential interface update. So we went out for early engagement that ran in February to March. Feedback was received from 54 businesses and organisations and 38 individuals. There was a lot of concern from businesses. I've just sort of highlighted there, we've highlighted what some of the concerns were. It's going to restrict growth, the costs falling solely on businesses. It unfairly favoured residents. There's lower amenity, and low amenity is historic and expected, could lead to loss of jobs, weakening of businesses, impinges existing use rights that we needed to protect industrial activities. It would lead to uncertainty for businesses and logistical challenges. So there was a lot of strong feedback from industry. On the other side, there was input from residents, which was needing to protect residential activities, support for the draft. Some didn't think the plan change went far enough to manage impacts. Some are accepting of lower amenity. Some raised significant impacts from daily impacts to infrequent, and just reaffirming that how they were impacted in terms of noise, visual, heavy vehicles, vibration, dust, odour, health, safety and wellbeing. So that has led to us having to review the plan change and actually focus on some of the more technical assessments and the cost benefit. There is a gap in the technical work to date, and that's the economic assessment of new or redrafted rules. Just sort of noting here that complaints and feedback are not enough to support new regulation. We are also mindful of the RMA reform, and I'll go on to the next slide where I set out some of the implications of the RMA reform and this rub that we have between the industrial and residential. Ideally, industrial zones next to residential are not ideal because they do generate. So we're thinking about some other alternatives of how to solve some of that incompatibility. We have looked across. One of the things we're mindful of, because the RMA reform is indicating that we're going to have nationally standardised zones, and that's quite significant because we could make a change to the plan and then 2 years down the track have to change it again. So we're very mindful of that. So what we've just nearly completed, or almost completed, is a comparison across New Zealand. So these are all the big cities, everywhere that's got industry that's adjoining residential. We've looked and compared all their policies and rules. And that is alerting that we have differences. We have differences to other cities. Some things are similar, some things vary. We've got bespoke rules. We manage noise in a slightly different way, but that's providing us really good information to sort of highlight where we might go with this direction for this plan change. Indicated there that the cost benefit assessment, we really need to focus on some alternative approaches. It might be that we come back and actually recommend a much narrower scope for this plan change. The blueprint report that's informing the RMA reform, it's not your law yet, but here's some takeaways from that report. To uphold and enjoy property rights. So that's residential property rights as well as the industrial. Existing use rights, we may see quite a bit of change there. They're signalling to enable reasonable expansion. So those that come to the nuisance should not complain. So that's a direct quote from that blueprint. Narrowing the scope of regulation, so only managing externalities, but still deal with that neighbourhood friction. Those that produce negative externalities must remediate or mitigate. Now that's important in this plan change because we need to demonstrate what those negative externalities are. So that's our job through this plan change, to have that technical evidence that can really justify what those externalities are. This is one I've highlighted, separate incompatible land use, and I'll just come back to that in a moment. There's still room, we believe, through the RMA reform, or what we expect, that we can have bespoke rules where needed. So if we can justify that bespoke rules, then we believe we can proceed with this plan change with some confidence. But it does indicate that subjective matters are excluded. So that's the quality of the built environment. And it states in the blueprint, there's no role for regulation of landscape or visual amenity. Now, we still may be able to justify that when we've got incompatible land uses, but there's a lot of uncertainty with the RMA form and how it's going to fall out. So this plan change is one of those ones that is particularly impacted. So as I mentioned, complaints are not sufficient justification for new regulation. I mentioned there about potentially changing and having to change again. That test for externality is quite high here. Existing use rights, it's very complex existing use rights. Who came first? What constitutes existing use rights? There are many unknowns. So we are focusing on that local variation, but actually looking at another way that we may address some of these interfaces, and that's separating incompatible land use. So that's potentially through rezonings. What did happen through the draft, the feedback was quite a few people came forward and said we would like to rezone our land. So some of those interfaces could be resolved through rezoning, but that's going to take us a bit of time to work through because each zoning needs to have its own merits assessment. But where we see there's valid, or it could actually lead to improvements in the longer term, we would like to pursue that with those landowners and with those neighbourhoods. So that's one pathway that we're exploring more. As mentioned, this takes time. So that feedback will be published today. And just working through that timeline, we don't see us being able to progress or get to make progress over the next 6 months. But again, we're looking at a hearing potentially next year to allow that work to continue. That's the end of our briefing.
Right, we had Aaron, Yanni, Kelly.
So mine goes back to the coastal stuff again. It'd be really good to see the line where we see the risk zone to the extreme as well as the problem possibly, and then the list of infrastructure that's within that and its age. So it's likely replacement, because obviously everything that could be buried in water in 100 years' time, most of it's been replaced between now and then, some later on, so you wouldn't do it in time and so forth. So it would be really good to see what that looks like. And then to have someone that, I'm thinking someone's done some work, but maybe not, on what mitigation looks like going forward. You know, like if the estuary had floodgates, for instance, does that buy us 50 years, 100 years, no years? But those kind of suggestions that have been around for years, and other ones like tsunami and stuff, does having the once proposed reef of Brighton, which creates the surf wave and the fish life, does that have a beneficial impact? Does it have no? All of those kind of things that have been around for years would be nice to see. So obviously that sounds a bit like an oceanography, but
this infrastructure assessment won't go that far. That's with coastal adaptation planning. But what this infrastructure will do is at least give us enough information to know if there is some mitigation assessment within it, but it's giving us the what is practically feasible with there's a bit of a judgment call in terms of mitigation. So what we need to be confident is that is there a chance, or is there a likelihood that mitigation might be a solution? So that's where all we can get to with this plan change. We can't solve all the problems. That's going to have to be the adaptation planning to look at those options, but we'll move the infrastructure knowledge a bit further down the track through this plan change.
okay. And then the crossover of other city rules inside of those zones, there's no proposals for medium density and stuff like that.
We so through
Because
plan
that
change
kind of
14.
makes no sense.
Yes, through plan change 14, the IHP recommendations were to accept our evidence on not providing for any more medium density within those risk areas, including the tsunami risk area. So so that was a good outcome. However, within those areas, there's already medium density enablement and for a lot of hazard sensitive activity. So it hasn't solved all the problem through plan change 14, all the potential risks. It's not managing all the risks to people and property, because the district plan currently enables, in Sumner it's got medium density, there's medium density in New Brighton, there are, we enable quite a lot of infill and redevelopment potential within these areas as well. The district plan is actually quite enabling still within these areas.
But plan change 12 will look at that.
That's right, plan change 12 is
And very obviously, if I move here from Auckland, I go buy a property in one of those zones. When I get the limb, what does it tell me that?
Yes.
So all of that stuff's now listed on the limb of the potential hazards and dangers, long-term, short-term, possible. That's all there?
Yes, so there's links to, every limb has a link to the hazard reports.
The limb process has just been upgraded to this new national regulation about natural hazards that now have to be included.
So, but they would be on the front page of the limb, wouldn't they?
Yes, there's a whole section within it. Yes.
Yeah, by the way.
Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yanni, please. You there, bud?
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. In regards to the plan change 20, I'm interested in how we can actually speed up the process. It's just been going on for so long. It's so behind schedule. There's council resolutions going back to 2018. It's been nearly 10 years since it was first raised. What are the options to actually progress this in a quicker way? Because people's quality of life, I guess, I hear you talk about the economic assessment, and I appreciate that you need to do that work. I guess the thing that I think we also need to think about is a psychosocial assessment, because the impact on the communities is more than just the complaints. It's actually the significant impacts on their health and well-being and on their psychosocial state because of the noise through the night, the lack of sleep, ongoing issues with all sorts of things in terms of those industrial areas so close to residential, many of which are actually non-compliant. So it's not just people saying they don't like it, they're actually not currently meeting the current district plan, and not seemingly able to have any consequence.
So there's the compliance is an enforcement matter, and all complaints are followed up with our enforcement officers, and that's the point of the difficulty of complaints. What we need to demonstrate very clearly through here, and yes, that social impact assessment could be something that we could look more carefully at in terms of including. We would need, what we are doing is trying to get a lot of more information about the interfaces, because it's not what we have identified through our site visits and our assessments. We've got people out there surveying these interfaces to get a lot more information, is that not all interfaces are the same. So some of these issues are very spot issues in particular locations. The district plan manages more generically. And so what we're looking at, and that's where some of the solution might actually be in a rezoning or of the land. So we are having to look at a lot more alternatives in this plan change. I do appreciate that it has taken a long time, but we do need to get this right, and we do need to make sure that we have that robust Section 32. But do take your point that we could do some more work in that socio-economic,
Just to add what was said, the annual plan has approved additional FTEs, and we can consider how that resource is allocated to some of these plan changes, so that there's greater support. But having said that, some of the work that Sarah's described, namely the economics, would need to go externally in any case.
So have we considered a bylaw? Because, like, you know, it seems to me that if I mean, certainly the area that I represent has really got a lot of challenges in this space. You know, we've had several schools that have actually had people getting sick, seriously ill. But we've also had some very specific types of activities. Is it better just to look at those couple of activities and put regulations either through a bylaw or through a specific reference in the district plan that would mean that they can't go in certain areas? And I guess the other thing is, if we can't do that, or if that's going to be too difficult, the special auditory characteristics of noise, the metal on metal, seems to be the biggest complaint in terms of what I'm getting in my area. And that's something I think if we can't do the whole thing, then at least can we look at getting something in about that with some more proactive information around how people can respond. Because when you say complaints are followed up, that's true, they do get logged. What we're finding now, for example, is when people ring at 5 a.m, noise control doesn't have anyone on, so they don't show up.
Yanni, they're all good points. If you want to talk to the team directly, I think it'd be good, because if you want to, we are right out of time. I've still got 3 left. So thanks for your input there. Kelly, please.
Just very quick question on PC 21. Could you possibly bring up that? Just looking for a bit of clarification. The orange area, thanks for doing the map and including those menus down the bottom of the buzzsaw or whatever it is. I noticed that orange says, the orange category one says a nighttime noise limit of 65 decibels across 15 minutes. Does that mean that if they stop for 2 minutes in that 15-minute period, that they're not contravening the, I guess, the rule, so to speak?
I think that's probably the way that I wrote it. So I tried to simplify too much, but it's about the LAEQ. So they measure across a 15-minute period, and it's about the average of the sound across that 15-minute period. So if it exceeds a 65 average across that 15-minute period, then that would contravene the rule.
Okay, so it's an average across, because I know residentially, in a case with the guy with the bandsaw, he was told that 50 decibels, if he stopped for part of that time, but over 15 minutes, he would be within his legal right to do that.
Bandsaw's one of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that, but just in terms of how this would apply, you have your LAEQ, which is the average, and that's averaged over each 15-minute period when you take the recording, or you also have LA max, which is the loudest that you might have allowable within any given moment in time. So.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Tara.
With Plan Change 13, so specifically the rules in RHA, so as things currently stand, what does it mean for people who live within the RHA if they want to put in double glazing or solar panels? So as things currently stand.
PC 13, I think there is I apologise, I think there's an exception for so basically improving the standards of your house.
Solar panels and some left.
I think solar panels are going to be digital.
And just on that, line, those that come to nuisance should not complain. So how does that apply to, say, for example, people that be familiar with the working port concept? Yeah. So how does that what are the implications there?
We don't know.
It's review sensitive.
It is review sensitivity. We don't know what the RMA reform will will make a
Right.
change in there, but I think what they're referring to is exist more around that potential changes to existing use rights, so allowing existing activities such as to expand and continue to operate.
Because the board does a good job of working with the community
Yes, that's
and
right.
mitigating those things. The nuance of that whole conversation is that yes, it is a working board, but that doesn't mean we can't get better.
Absolutely. And that's been some of the feedback that came through a lot of, not just the port, but other industries as well, saying that they actually do their very, very best to try and mitigate their effects. So it's not, the impacts are not universal, and it does change depending on which interface you're talking about or we're focusing on. So yes, there's always ways to improve. And some industries, like Ravensdown, they pay for reglazing of windows in the area. So there is a lot of good work that does go on.
Also, just worth noting in broader terms, the expert panel that's given recommendations to the government and the cabinet to receive that, those recommendations will give rise to two bills to replace the RMA. That will be introduced after the election, I expect. We'll come back to you at a future date to brief you on the consequences of those reforms for program of work and resources.
Thank you, Mark. And lastly, for over time, Mark.
Yeah, looking at some of the private plan change and thinking about the PC20, the industrial residential interface, do they sort of interact into each other and make sure that when we're doing private plan change, they don't bring on the...
Yes, it's one of the key considerations when we get a private plan change through. We'll be looking at, we're not creating new problems or future problems with these interfaces. Yes, I mean, we haven't been able to go into too much detail today because it's a whole another briefing on the private plan changes in our area planning work. That's something that was mentioned in the earlier slide, but there's a whole lot of strategic planning issues we deal with through that work.
Cool.
Thank you very much, and thanks for bringing us up to speed. Well done.